Good afternoon. It is a real pleasure to meet with you all today to discuss the Boren Awards, our scholarships and our fellowships, and the opportunities that we have to share with you for study abroad through this program. My name is Kyle Cox, and I work with the Institute of International Education. We at IIE, we are passionate about study abroad, passionate about this exchange of ideas across borders, facilitating study abroad and providing opportunities for American citizens to go overseas and to bring foreign scholars to the US as well. In fact, happy International Education Week. We just released some open doors data. That's something that we do at IIE every year. Just real passionate about international education. And with that, it's again, just a real pleasure for me to be able to talk to you about Boren and the opportunity to go overseas, learn a language, get exposed to the culture in which that language is spoken, and then come back from that time overseas with an interest in government service. We at Boren, we are a government-sponsored program. We're funded by the Department of Defense. Back in 1991, an act of Congress was passed with the purpose of taking some DoD funding and using it to incentivize American students to go overseas, get immersive language learning experience, learn the language in the culture where it's spoken, and come back with some interest in government service. And so that's how the Boren Awards came to be. That's where the funding for our scholarships and our fellowships, scholarships, undergrad awards, fellowships, graduate awards, that's where the funding comes from. I myself was not a Boren. I did not know about Boren when I was in school. So it gives me extra joy to be able to share this opportunity to your students. And I've been with Boren for 4 years, IIE for 9. And the more I do these presentations, the less formal I become. So don't be too upset if I drop the occasional corny joke or make a bad pun. The more I do this, the more I let my hair down, so to speak, for a guy who's bald. So just to get us started, who's eligible to apply? First, you must be a US citizen. You must be planning to study a foreign language in an eligible world region. The full list of languages and regions are on our website, and I'll definitely refer to them later on in the presentation. But just a heads up, this is a study abroad program. We are expecting you to go overseas during your Boren funded study, and you must be committed to learning a language in the culture in which that language is spoken. You must be committed to learning a language that is common to that destination country. Again, I'll definitely go over the list of languages and countries later on in the presentation. And then finally, additionally, you must be matriculated at an accredited US institution or applying to grad school. So lots of syllables here. What do we mean? You must be on the books as a US student for the duration of your time overseas. You cannot do Boren as a gap year. You can't do Boren after you've already graduated. You must still be in a degree-seeking program for the duration of your time abroad. This gets a little interesting for seniors who are in the last year of their undergrad. They can kind of go one way or the other. They can see if their university will allow them to delay their graduation date so that they can apply as a scholar, or if they're interested in going to grad school, they can apply down the road for our fellowships as a graduate student. Seniors can kind of go either way. And for fellows, you don't necessarily need to be in a graduate program at the time of application, but you must be in a graduate program by the time you touch ground overseas. Before you start your study abroad, you must be in a degree-seeking program at a US institution. And then finally, you cannot be a citizen of the destination country. Whatever country you're proposing to visit cannot hold citizenship of that location. But this is it as far as eligibility requirements. There's no age minimum, there's no GPA requirement. For most of our languages, there's no proficiency requirement, although there are 2 exceptions to that, and I will talk about those later on in the presentation. But for most of our languages, you can come into any level. These are the bars to entry. These are the boxes you have to check, and if you can check these boxes, you are strongly encouraged to apply for a Boren Award. One thing worth noting, just a programmatic detail, everything that I'm going to say in this presentation can be found on our website. So if at any point in time you want to go back to something that I'm touching on a different slide, jot down the link, go to the website, plenty of information there on every one of the bullet points that comes up in this presentation. So feel free to follow up on any of that information. Now, the next few slides are the key focuses of Boren, the core pillars, the central tenets, the things that are at the core of who we are and what you really need to know about us as you're considering applying and considering what's going to make your application most competitive. The first focus that I need to mention is our focus on national security. We don't actually have a very strict definition of national security. We recognize that when we say national security, a lot of people immediately think diplomacy, defense, development, one of the 3 Ds you see depicted here on this slide. And those all certainly fall under the umbrella of national security for sure. But we don't want anyone to feel particularly tied strictly to one of those 3 ideas or interpretations. We leave national security open to any policy issue that's related to US national security or foreign affairs. So yes, diplomacy and defense and development all count, but so do economics and trade if you're a business student, or if you're dealing with environmental issues, that definitely counts. If you're an engineering student and you want to talk about energy policy or anything to do with climate, like there's so many different ways to interpret national security. We leave it to you to pick an issue, pick something that you can articulate your application around and make a specific, detailed, and focused argument on that particular issue. So lots of ways to interpret national security. Just pick one that makes sense for the applicants based on your academic history, based on your professional ambitions, based on your perspectives of the world. Pick an issue that makes sense to you and that you can articulate well in your application in its relation to national security. We also have a focus on public service. In fact, everyone who wins a Boren Award is committed to serving 1 year in an internationally focused position within the federal government after you finish your time overseas and after you finish your academic study, your current degree-seeking program. That's a minimum service requirement of just 1 year, just 12 months. Full disclosure, preference is given to applicants who are thinking government work for more than a year. If you're thinking government work as a career, or public service as a significant chunk of your career, that's definitely going to look great in your application. That's something we strongly encourage you to mention because that's a preference for us. But minimum, all we're asking for is just 12 months, just 1 year. And you're not going to be left alone to just find a job, so to speak. We're not going to assign you a position. We're not giving you a role within government. But we do have tools to help you with the job search. We do have things that we'll put at your disposal, and I'll definitely talk about that later on in the presentation. Also worth noting that you don't have to do this service as soon as you come back to the United States. There is a bit of a buffer. If you win the scholarship, for example, that's our undergraduate award. You go overseas, you come back, you finish your academic studies, you now have 3 years to get started on this service. And if at some point within that 3 years you decide to go back to school or you win another grant research opportunity, the clock will stop, allow you to complete that academic interest, resume once that is over. Fellows operate by a similar rule, only for some reason we have this expectation that grad students know what they want to do with their lives, and so you only get 2 years as a buffer. One other thing worth noting about the employment just slipped my mind. I'm sure it'll come to me later on in the presentation. But really important that you know, you're not going to be left alone. We will be helping you with the job search. In fact, that's one of the draws to Boren. A lot of students who are thinking about applying for a Boren Award know in advance that this is a great way to get your foot in the door if you're thinking government service as a career. Boren can be a really helpful entry point. And so worth keeping in mind that this service isn't always necessarily a requirement so much as it is a professional development opportunity after you finish your academic studies. And then finally, focus on language and culture. As I mentioned before, you must be committed to going overseas and learning a language while you're in country. It needs to be a key component of your application, this demonstration that you are going to gain proficiency in your target language for the duration of your time overseas. We don't want anyone to do what I did. I took French during my undergrad, was not committed at all to learning my French, and consequently I left college speaking no French. Shame on me and shame on you if you take this Boren funding and aren't serious about learning language overseas. In fact, if we see in your application a lack of commitment to gaining experience with the language, you're probably not going to win an award. So we need to see that gaining proficiency is a key focus of yours for the duration of this study abroad experience. I mentioned before that with most languages, we don't actually have a proficiency requirement. You can come in at beginner, novice, elementary, you've never spoken a word of the language before. That's absolutely fine. Just show us how you plan on gaining proficiency in the language for the duration of this time overseas. So if you're starting at beginner, that's great. Show us the clear plan and steps you're going to take to get from beginner to intermediate. Or if you're already fairly proficient in the language, say you're almost fluent, but your professional speaking skills need some development, show us how you're going to get from conversational to professional in your language skills. We need to see some clear steps you're going to take to make those proficiency gains during the duration of your time overseas. I've gotten 2 questions in the chat that are actually really important, and I'm happy to take the time now to address them here. We recognize the elephant in the room for all study abroad right now has been our current pandemic. And it's important that you know that while this is a study abroad opportunity and we want you to go overseas, your health and safety is our primary concern at Boren. And we're not asking you to do anything that's going to jeopardize your immediate well-being. What has been the result as far as the pandemic is concerned has been that some of our programs that some of our students who should be going overseas right now have had to defer, have had to delay their study abroad. We've had to take away opportunities for certain countries for right now. And again, that's just for security concerns. But we try to be as flexible with students as we can. Flexibility is also very important to us, and we try to work with students' plans to make sure they are able to study abroad. But again, health and safety is our top concern. And if it seems like a country just will not be a safe location, then unfortunately, we can't send anyone to that location. However, going forward, thinking about this current application cycle, thinking about next year, we're moving forward as if everything is normal. We're going forward with this current application as if study abroad will be back on track for next year. The second question that came into the chat, who reviews our applications for the scholarship? This is important for you to know as we go throughout the rest of our presentation. Applications are reviewed by panelists from academic communities, from universities. We bring in study abroad professionals at their various campuses. We bring in language professors. We bring in experts in different fields within the academic community to come in and review these applications. And so I definitely want to keep in mind that you're writing for an academic audience, people who are very familiar with study abroad and can weed through which programs are weak, see if your commitment to language is legit, things like that.
Or people.
We are definitely open to having students who are studying abroad for the first time. We totally want students who are we want a diverse group of students, right? So we're looking for students who are both studying abroad for first time, and maybe students who have studied abroad before. It can't hurt. It does not hurt at all if you've never studied before, out of country, overseas, or studied the language before. That we're totally open to students who are studying abroad for the first time. And as far as support for those students, we do try to give them as much of a prep, as much of a heads up before their studies overseas. In fact, we have 2 events every year. One of them before students go overseas, it's called our convocation. And part of the convocation is just alerting students to things that might be of issue before you go abroad. Beyond that, every recipient is assigned an advisor who's kind of their Boren go-to person for the duration of their time abroad. And if that student has any sort of issue with finances or living arrangements, personal safety and well-being, they definitely have a Boren contact who they can reach out to immediately to discuss workarounds and solutions to those particular hardships or concerns. So yeah, definitely open to first-time study abroad as well. Good questions. Those are really good questions. Keep them coming. So there's 2 types of eligible programs, 2 different formats students can consider applying. The first would be our flagship language initiatives. These are all languages and countries that were deemed to need extra incentivizing, extra encouragement. And so we at Boren worked with our sponsors at the National Security Education Program and affiliates overseas and American councils to craft these specific programs for students to go overseas and get intense, rigorous language immersion in these languages in these regions. We've got the African Flagship Language Initiative, the South Asian Flagship Language Initiative, Indonesian Flagship Language Initiative, and the newest of the group, the Turkish Flagship Language Initiative. And these are very pre-structured by us. There's a summer domestic component. The student immediately goes overseas for the fall. They have the option to stay for the spring if they want to, though it's not required. And I'll definitely touch on each one of these in a little more depth over the next couple of slides. But beyond the flagship language initiatives, we also have self-designed programs. And self-designed is literally, it's that. The student is designing this program with the help of their institution. They're picking a study abroad location. They decide the duration. They decide what the language learning is going to look like. It's on the student to work with their university to craft the nuts and bolts of their program and put it together in an application that they propose to us. A little more detail on the flagship language initiative, starting with the AFLI, the African Flagship Language Initiative. The languages are French in Senegal, Swahili in Tanzania, Akan or Chi in Ghana, Wolof in Senegal, Zulu in South Africa. The summer domestic component for this was at the University of Florida down in Gainesville. However, that's actually up for recompetition this year. So I can't officially say as of yet where it will be next summer. But there will be a summer domestic component. The student will go to that location for 8 weeks, get some prep work in the language prior to then immediately going overseas for the fall. They can stay overseas for the spring if they want to, though it is not required, definitely strongly encouraged. And with the fall overseas location, with most of the flagship language initiative locations, we've picked a program, we've picked an institution that we will send the student to. The exceptions are for Akan, Tree, Wolof, and Zulu. Those we don't actually get that many applications, so we haven't picked a designated overseas location, but we will work with the applicant to find an appropriate overseas study abroad venue. One thing worth noting, any applicants interested in studying French, this is the preferred way to do French. The French through the AFLI in Senegal, this is your best bet for Boren funding to do French. And French is actually one of the 2 languages that we do have a proficiency requirement. You must be intermediate at the time of going overseas. And we will test you prior to conferring the award. The other is Spanish, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. But if you're interested in doing French, this is your best bet. French under the African Flagship Language Initiative. Then there's the Indonesian Flagship Language Initiative, or IFLI, for the study of Bahasa Indonesian. The summer domestic program is at the University of Wisconsin, Madison campus. The fall overseas program is in Malang, Indonesia. The spring overseas is also encouraged, but not required. The South Asian Flagship Language Initiative, or SAFLI, the summer domestic program, again, the University of Wisconsin, Madison. The fall overseas programs are both in India, Hindi in Jaipur, and Urdu in Lucknow. And then the spring is, again, optional. And then the newest of the group, the TURFLI, the Turkish Flagship Language Initiative. This is actually year 2 for the TURFLI. The summer domestic, also at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The fall overseas program is in Baku, Azerbaijan. Technically, Turkey, not a preferred Boren destination, so we're not sending anyone on the Turkish Flagship Language Initiative program, but I hear Baku is lovely and you will still get plenty of experience learning Turkish in Azerbaijan. And then finally, the spring overseas program, encouraged but not required. We find that the students who gravitate towards the flagship language initiatives do so for one of 2 reasons. They like that it's predetermined, that all the details have been arranged in advance, and so that they apply for that reason. There's a lot less for them to have to figure out on their end or figure out with their university. Also, these programs are when I say language focus, I mean it is 9 to 5 all day, every day, including some weekends. You're just learning the language, you're just getting exposed to the culture. Not a whole lot of time for additional academic study or research. And some students are drawn to that as well. So those are the two groups of students who tend to gravitate towards the flagship language initiative. But as I mentioned before, we also have self-designed programs. And like I mentioned, this self-designed is literally you as the applicant work with your university to pick a location, pick a duration, pick your living arrangements, all of the above. How your language learning, how that's going to fit in. For this, the best piece of advice I can give to any applicant is that they be in contact with your university. Do not walk to your campus rep's office. Let them know that you're interested in applying for a Boren Award. Get their input on university regulations, like what kind of insurance does your university require? Does your university have study abroad programs that might meet Boren requirements? Work with your university for all of your application. We recognize that fellows in particular like to have a little bit of variety, flexibility in what they propose to do while they're studying overseas. That's totally fine. We get fellows who are interested in just doing academic study. We have fellows who are interested in doing academic internships. And we have helped fund people's research before. We've helped fund dissertation work. That's all fine, as long as the fellow demonstrates that while they're doing that internship or while they're doing their research, they're still committed to learning the language. So doing tutoring outside of the internship or doing research in the language, we need to see that commitment to gaining proficiency in the language as part of their fellowship plan. These are monetary awards. These are funding for overseas study. How much money am I talking about? Up to $25,000 for 25 to 52 weeks. That's the maximum you could receive for either scholars or fellows, up to $25,000 for 25 to 52 weeks, $12,500 for 12 to 24 weeks. If you are an undergrad STEM student, you can actually get $8,000 for 8 to 11 weeks. Typically, the shortest amount of time you could go overseas on the Boren is just 12 weeks, but we recognize that that can be a bit of a challenge for STEM students. They might have some strict course requirements, on-campus requirements that don't really cooperate well with lengthy overseas study. So for undergrad STEM and only undergrad STEM students, we have this out for $8,000 for 8 to 11 weeks. Fellowship students, grad students, again, the funding brackets, $25,000 for 25 to 52 weeks, $12,500 for 12 to 24 weeks. And fellows can actually request additional funding for domestic study prior to going overseas. If they wanted to get some prep work in the language before going abroad, they can request up to $12,000 for that domestic language learning. But no one ever gets more than $30,000 in total. So if they're hoping to get the $25,000 for 25 to 52 weeks, they can then only get $5,000 for the domestic. Let me go over this one slide and then I will address the question in the chat. We base your award off of a budget you submit as part of your application. These are all estimates. We don't expect you to have the exact dollars and cents at this point, but give us a rough estimate for how much this study abroad experience is going to cost. And these are all things that Boren will cover. These are all things that your Boren funding can be applied to. So you will want to include them in that budget. A round-trip ticket compliant with the Fly America Act. The Fly America Act means use an American carrier if you're using government funding. So American Airlines, Delta, United, one of their affiliates. No one flies for the Boren first class. I fly for Boren all the time and I've never flown first class. Neither will you as a Boren recipient. So please get a nice economy estimate, work that into your budget. All program tuition and materials, all of your learning related expenses for your time overseas, books, coursework, things like that, include that in your budget. Boren will cover those costs. Overseas medical insurance. I cannot tell you which insurance you have to use. We leave it to your university to determine the insurance, but whatever they tell you to enroll in, we will cover those costs, include it in your budget. Cost of living, your lodging and food costs for your time in country. This takes a little bit of research on the part of the applicant. Because there are options. Are you going to do a homestay with a family who's going to feed you? Are you going to a university where you're living in a dormitory and eating out of a cafeteria? There are variables here, and you need to consider how much each option is going to cost, and whatever you decide, work that cost into your budget. Local transportation. I'm a New Yorker. I get around by mass transit. Is there mass transit in your destination country? What does it look like to get from point A to point B? Include those costs in your budget as well. We will cover those. Visa-related travel. If you need to leave the country at some point for visa purposes, we can cover that as well. Things we will not cover. No passports. We're not covering your passport costs. We're not covering vaccinations or immunizations. We're not giving a dime for anyone who's not you, so no dependents. And no personal travel or entertainment, no leisure activities on Boren's account. You're not going on a Boren-funded vacation. But other than that, we'll cover most of your expenses overseas. The most important thing to mention before I leave this slide. There is absolutely no benefit whatsoever to having a low estimate in your budget. It does not make you more competitive to aim low. We don't care. We're not looking at equally competitive applications and going, oh no, how do we pick? Go with the one that's cheaper. That's not a deciding factor for us. What we need you to do is have an honest idea of how much this study abroad is going to cost and make sure that your numbers are reasonable, but will cover what you need to cover while you are overseas. Because if you ask us for 18K and you get overseas and find out you needed 20K, there's no coming back to us and asking for the additional covering of the difference. So better you know in advance how much the study abroad experience is going to cost and work that into our budget. The question was raised, will a critical language scholarship hinder, benefit, or have any effect on your application? Can't see it hindering, but I can definitely see it helping because it shows that the applicant has prior experience learning a language and is serious about making those gains in their language proficiency. It adds to the credibility of their language pursuits. So I can't think of any way that it could hurt. Unless there are specific critical language scholarship requirements that conflict with ours, which I can't think of any right now. I can't think of any, so I don't think that there's any conflict there. But it does help to have that demonstration of prior commitment to learning the language. The next few slides are our preferences. I do have to emphasize the word preference. These are the things that we're looking for. These are the things that are going to make the application the strongest, make your application the most competitive. However, these are preferences, not requirements. So if you're not planning on meeting one of these preferences in your application, don't freak out. You can still apply. Just recognize that you're going to need to have a really strong national security argument or a really strong demonstration of how this language learning experience is going to benefit you in order to balance out you're not meeting that particular preference. Our first preference and our biggest preference, duration of overseas study. To put it succinctly, the longer the better, like literally for your application chances. The longer you can propose to go overseas, the better. You can see among recent recipients for our fellowship, that's a graduate award, over 87% of recent recipients were proposing programs of 25 weeks or more. For scholars, it was 69% were proposing programs of 25 weeks or more. That's not to say you cannot propose a study abroad experience shorter than that. It's just that's clearly our preference for longer periods of time. And we recognize that this is unusual. Boren's a little bit weird in this. We have this emphasis on longer programs. Generally speaking, in the United States, programs are like summer length or less than our minimum 12 weeks. But we want you to go overseas and learn a language and get exposed to the language in the culture in which it's spoken. We want you to make proficiency gains in that language, and being overseas for as long as possible just generally contributes to your language learning experience. So that's why we have such a heavy emphasis on overseas study. And seriously, like if you're applying and you're thinking you're proposing 16 weeks, but you could possibly do 20, put 20 in the application. Like it is a stronger application to go for as long as you can. Our next biggest preference, location. For this, really go to our website and pull up the full list of countries so you can see the names. But just going off of this map here, if it's in gray, that's a no. The United States is not a study abroad location. Canada, they mostly speak English. Australia, the wildlife is terrifying and they mostly speak English. I'm just kidding, it's lovely down under. Why is Western Europe in gray? It's not to say that Western Europe isn't important for national security concerns. Of course they are. They're some of our closest allies. However, they're too popular. There's way too many American citizens going to Western Europe for study abroad. Those languages are very common on US campuses, and we're trying to encourage US citizens to go to locations that are less commonly visited, learn languages that aren't as commonly taught here in the United States. So Western Europe, it's a no-go zone just because too many people go already. If it's in green, green means go, all thumbs up, feel free to apply. If it's in blue, I call the blue countries our Facebook countries because we have its complicated relationship statuses, and we can't guarantee that we're sending anyone to that blue country this year. What you need to do if you're proposing a blue country is have an alternate backup location. You need to have a viable alternate location just in case this is a year we're not sending anyone to that country. So for example, if you go to our website and look at the statistics of where people have gone the past few years, you'll see that Kazakhstan is actually a pretty popular destination. Why is that? Because it's a great backup country for Russian. And we have not sent anyone to Russia in the time that I've been on Boren. And so you'll want to list a legitimate backup for Russian if Russian is your language. And we might not send you to Russia. You can list Russia as your primary focus, but you have to have a backup destination just in case this is not the year. And that's the case for all of the blue countries. You can list the blue country, but you also have to provide a backup just in case this is not the year. You didn't hear this from me, but for Russia, this is again probably not the year. Language preferences. Long list of preferred languages, lots of options. As I mentioned before, for most languages, you can come in at any level of proficiency. There's no minimum requirements. The exceptions are French and Spanish. French, you must be intermediate. Spanish, you must be advanced. We will test you prior to conferring the award. It's an oral test over the phone. And Spanish, you'll note, is actually not on this list. Spanish is technically not a preferred Boren language, but you can propose it as long as you can make a strong argument for its relevance to national security in the country that you're proposing. That's also the case for any other language that's not on this list. If you're wanting to study an indigenous language, for example, there's a lot of indigenous languages that are not on this list, but if that's your interest, that's totally fine. You just need to make an argument for why it's relevant to national security concerns, why you need to go study it in that country. You're more than welcome to apply. Finally, our field of study preferences. I like to say that this is not so much a preference that we're looking for, so much as these are the fields of study that tend to prefer Boren. These are the fields of study that tend to produce the most applications. These are the fields of study that tend to produce the strongest applications. Why is that? These are the fields of study that tend to have the easiest time connecting to a legitimate national security concern. But that said, if you're not from one of these particular backgrounds or disciplines, as long as you can make a connection to a legitimate national security concern, you are more than welcome to apply. I like to say if you're an art student and you really need to go study a language overseas, and you can make a connection between ceramics and national security, good luck making that argument. But if you think you can, you are more than welcome to apply. So even if you're not coming from one of these particular backgrounds, still, if you can make that connection, you're more than welcome to apply. The next few slides are all going to touch on our service component. I mentioned before that everyone who wins a Boren Award is required to serve a minimum of 12 months in an internationally focused position within the federal government after you finish your academic studies, after you finish your time overseas. These are the resources that I hinted at earlier that we will put at your disposal to help you with that job search. You're not left on your own to go swimming through USAjobs.gov. we're going to help you as much as we can to make sure you're able to fulfill your service requirement. Our best resource will be the National Security Education Program Service Team. That's our sponsor. And they are all Borens themselves who have fulfilled their service, and now their job is helping other Borens fulfill their service. They'll be the ones who are tracking to make sure that you're doing some sort of acceptable government work. They'll also be the ones who will be helping with resume consultation and following up with various opportunities that they find that might be of interest to you. They have their own job board, NCEPNet. As soon as you touch ground back in the States from your time overseas, you'll be enrolled in NCEPNet, and you can see all the jobs that are posted up on that board. There'll be jobs that they will post up on that board that government agencies will have created specifically for Borens. Like an agency will go to NCEP and say, we're looking for a Boren with this particular set of language skills for this particular position. And those jobs are only found on NCEPNet. We have special hiring authorities, non-competitive statuses to help keep your resume at the top of the list when it comes to certain positions within government. I mentioned before that we have 2 big events every year, one event to prepare students for going overseas. We also have an event after you come back, that's the Federal Employment Seminar, to prepare you for fulfilling the service requirement. In a normal year, it's a 2-day, all expenses paid trip to DC. Day 1 is just useful information that you'll need as you're getting ready for government work, information about security clearances. We bring in Borens who have completed their service to talk about how their service benefited their career and what they're doing with their lives now. We bring in different agencies to talk about what makes an ideal candidate for their agency. Some years, if we can get them, we have someone come in and talk about polygraph testing and lie detectors. This day 1 is all just different things that you'll need to know as you're getting ready for government service. Day 2 is what you see depicted in that picture on the slide. It's a job fair. Last year, we had 30 agencies at the job fair, and you as the Boren can walk around with your resume, with your business card, and make your hire me pitch. And in the 4 years that I've been with Boren, someone has gotten hired on the spot at the job fair every single year. In fact, I like to make fun of FEMA because they're kind of ridiculous. FEMA comes to the job fair with like their whole HR department. Like we typically give people like 1 or 2 tables. FEMA will take up like 3 or 4 tables because they come to do interviews on the spot. And they have hired someone at every job fair that I've attended. It's actually my favorite event of the year. The Boren Forum, that's our alumni association. Sometimes when it comes to hiring in general, not just the government, but in private sector as well, that's not what you know, it's who you know. And the Boren Forum is really good at networking, really good at connecting Borens with other Borens, seeing if opportunities can be found that way. All of this to say we're going to help you. We're putting resources at your disposal to help you with the job search. We want you to be able to fulfill this service requirement. As I mentioned before, we don't think of it as a requirement. We think of it as an opportunity. This is a great way after you come back from your time overseas to get some really useful entry-level position or critical work experience working in government service. We really think of it more of it as an opportunity, and we want to make it as beneficial of an opportunity as possible. I totally forgot to ask if you have ROTC on your campus. You do? Okay, please let them know about the Boren. They make phenomenal applicants. Their cadets and midshipmen obviously already have a strong interest in national security concerns, but the government work they have to do after their degree counts towards our government service as well. So they make really phenomenal applicants. The one thing to be aware of when it comes to cadets and midshipmen is that their schedules are very strict. They don't have a lot of wiggle room, not a whole lot of time for study abroad. However, because they make such phenomenal candidates in other respects, we kind of waive that expectation for lengthy overseas study. If a cadet or midshipman comes to us and says, all I can do is 12 weeks, we take it because we recognize that their calendars are very hard to maneuver. And they tend to make such phenomenal applicants in other respects that if all they can do is just 12 weeks, they're good to go. There's actually a button on our application that asks if they're in the ROTC. Just make sure they click that button so we're on the lookout for them. But they really are really strong candidates, and you would be surprised how little the DoD knows about this particular DoD program. So if you can let them know, please do. Now, when it comes to the service requirement, we will ask in your application that the applicant demonstrate that they've given some thought to roles and responsibilities, agencies within the government where they could see themselves fulfilling their service in some way that tracks with their national security issue and some way that makes sense for them professionally in their professional trajectory. These are the agencies that really stand out to us. These are the ones that we prioritize. These are the agencies we're looking for in a particular application. The Department of Defense, the Department of State, Homeland Security, and all 17 agencies of the intelligence community. Why are these the ones that we prioritize? Apart from obviously we're funded by the Department of Defense, these are the agencies with the biggest budgets. These are the agencies that tend to have the most hiring at the entry-level position. So when it comes to feasibility, students saying, I'm interested in doing government work, we can see the connection to national security and see the possibilities as being very, very feasible within these particular agencies. That said, if an applicant is not thinking about working for one of those four groups, there are so many other agencies currently employing Borens. They just need to make a connection between that other agency and, again, a legitimate national security concern. So if you're talking about agriculture, the Peace Corps, Congress, one of my favorite Boren stories is a lawyer who got a job with NASA. I feel like CDC is going to be pretty popular in applications this year. Commerce, if you're a student who's thinking about the environment, there's forestry or the interior, energy agencies. There's so many different agencies all addressing legitimate national security concerns. It's just on the applicant to demonstrate in their application that, yes, this is a concern that tracks with what I'm interested in. The work of this agency meets my national security interests and would be something that would benefit my professional ambitions. So again, these are our priorities, but if students are thinking beyond those, they're more than welcome to demonstrate interest in these other agencies in their applications as well. And I do strongly recommend that students take a look at our website, go to that page, that federal careers link. We have links to several different job boards. So while you're working on your application, you can peruse several different job boards and start getting a feel for what agency does what agency is hiring for people with my background, people with my interests. You can start thinking about that as you're working on your application, because it is something we want to see in your application. Speaking of, what do we want to see in your application? The application requires 2 essays. For scholars, we want 2 letters of recommendation, maximum of 3. Fellows must submit 3 letters of recommendation. We do need transcripts. They can be unofficial, but they must cover your entire collegiate experience. We do need a study plan summary, just some basic details about what you're going to do while you're overseas. If you're applying as a fellow and you're thinking about doing an internship, we want to see a letter of overseas affiliation for that internship. If you're doing research, it's a good idea to give us your abstract or methodology for that research. The entire application is online, and please feel free to never, under any circumstances, send us anything in the mail. Just go to our website, click the Apply Now button. That takes you right to our online application portal. The part of the application that will most likely take the most of your time will be the essays. Essay 1 will ask you to lay out your national security argument. Why is this issue or topic? Why is this country, this language? How do they all tie together, and why are they important to national security concerns for the United States? The thought experiment we like to give students is think you're in a room, imagine you're in a room with a member of Congress, and you need to demonstrate to that member of Congress why your study abroad experience would be of interest to them or someone living in their district. What argument would you give them for the relevance of your study abroad experience? That's national security argument for essay 1. Essay 2, where you do your preparedness for extended overseas study. So while I mentioned before, you do not need to have had any prior overseas study. If you have, include it here. If you have any prior experience learning the language, include it here. If you have any prior work experience that's relevant to your particular national security issue, include that here. Anything that shows that you as an applicant can be trusted to go overseas for 12, 18, 24, beyond weeks, and stay sane and responsible for your time overseas. You also want to include in essay 2 your future career plans, your long-term ambitions and professional goals, including how you see yourself fulfilling your service requirement. This is where that agency or that role that we've asked you to look up, this is where you sneak that into your application. Mention that here in essay 2. Both essays are 800 words for scholars. It's 1,000 words for essay for fellows. And we recognize that that's not a lot of space. So you need to be concise, but you also need to be clear in your writing. And just make sure that you're giving as much useful information in that 800 words as you can. Not a whole lot of like outside quotes or anything. We want to hear from the student, but make sure that it's clear and that you address our prompts. This is really important. When you open up the applications and you get to the essays, we give specific prompts on what we're asking for. Skip a prompt, doom your application. Like, you need to address every single prompt. If it's a piece of information we've asked you for, please include it in your essay. Do not skip a prompt. The deadlines for our online application are June 1st. For anyone who's studying after June 1st of 2021 or before March 1st of 2022. For scholars, it's February 3rd, 2021. For fellows, it's January 27th, 2021, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 5:01, we wag our finger. Please make sure you hit submit long before 5 p.m. It's not that we anticipate some sort of glitch with our system, but if there is some sort of trouble getting your application into the portal, rather you find out at 2:45 than at 4:45. So please do not wait till the last minute to hit submit. Now, these are our deadlines. This is when the application needs to officially be into us. Many campuses have their own on-campus deadline, an opportunity for you as the applicant to submit your essays, key components of your application to your campus rep, other members of your university community, for them to review. Even if your university does not have a set on-campus deadline, and you should definitely be in contact with your campus rep to find out if they do. But if they don't, still be in touch with your campus rep. Make sure someone looks over your application before you hit submit and send it to us. The more eyeballs you can get on your essays, the better. Send your essays to the people who are writing your letters of recommendation so that they know how to tailor their letter of recommendation to your application. Like, you want to have people overlook your application before you hit submit. So be on the lookout for if your campus has its own on-campus deadline. And finally, of course, we want you to be in touch with your university, but you're also more than welcome to reach out to us. I mentioned before, do not send us anything in the mail. I mean, none of us are even in the office right now anyway, but you're always more than welcome to send us an email, boren@iie.org. We all check the inbox pretty regularly, so we'll get back to you pretty quickly. 1-800-618-NCEP, that rings 4 different phones, including this one. So if you're calling to complain about the presentation, there's a 1 in 4 chance I'm answering the phone. Do keep that in mind. borenawards.org, our website. I really can't stress it enough. Everything I've covered in this presentation and then some. We have webinars that we're constantly producing. We're actually working on our essay webinar right now. It'll be like 20 minutes all on what makes a competitive essay. We've got webinars on the national security requirement. We've got webinars on all the flagship language initiatives. There's so many resources up on the website. So feel free to join our mailing list. So if we add anything, you'll be notified. But yeah, the website's just chock full of information. Please go check it out. If you want to reach out to us on social media, you're more than welcome to do so. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. Our YouTube is actually pretty useful for finding testimonials and firsthand experiences from past Borens, so feel free to look those up as well. We're not on TikTok because we don't dance, and we're not on Snapchat because it don't make sense, but we're everywhere else. And that is my presentation. I hope you've been convinced and talked into applying. Again, really serious, reach out to us if you have any questions, and be in contact with your campus rep throughout your entire application process.